The Spanish Spider. Suppose you had radical ideas about religion during medieval times. In that case, you'd wish you weren't living in Spain, because the Spanish Inquisition was known for having some of the most creatively brutal execution methods at that time. Included among those were the Spanish spider. Also known as the strapado, the Spanish spider was a form of hanging with a few extra steps that made it much more painful. You'll be hoisted up by your arms with your hands tied behind your back. This means your entire body weight pulls you on your shoulders and joints, causing severe pain. The strapado was meant to prolong the agony instead of simply dropping you and breaking your neck. As you're up there dangling, your weight slowly dislocates your limbs out of your sockets while tearing every muscle up there. You won't be able to help but scream for mercy. But the Spanish Inquisition won't stop there, because they're going to add weights to your ankles, causing your body to stretch well beyond normal proportions, making you look like a disfigured medieval version of Mr. Fantastic. It goes without saying that this device was eventually going to kill you, especially if your arms get ripped out of your body. If not, the pain you'd have to endure the entire time would be more than enough to kill you, as your body won't be able to handle more pain. It was the Spanish Inquisition's way of telling people to never get on the wrong side of the church. Execution by elephant. Today, you'll surely think that elephants are gentle and intelligent giants who deserve all the love and care in the world. But people in the medieval era, particularly in Asia, the southern parts of Europe, and Africa, used these creatures as the ultimate instruments of justice. Of course, we know that elephants are incredibly large, making them useful beasts of burden for many different medieval cultures hundreds of years ago. But these majestic giants were also smart enough to be trained to execute criminals in many different ways. These elephants usually had a handler responsible for giving them orders on how to deal with certain criminals. The simplest way to execute you using an elephant was to allow the weight of this massive beast to crush you into mush. If the authorities wanted you to suffer, they would have the elephant crush your limbs methodically. However, there were also cases where you'd be tied to two elephants going the opposite direction so that they'd tear you into two. The worst part was that executions by elephants were public spectacles. Think of it as your modern-day circus, where elephants are trained to do various tricks, but instead of doing stunts, these medieval elephants were trained to kill for the sake of entertainment and to ensure that no one would try to defy the law. After all, no one wanted to get flattened by an elephant. Drawing and quartering. You would know that you committed only the worst crimes imaginable if you were condemned to die through drawing and quartering, an execution method that could have come from the most sadistic medieval mind. The brutal nature of drawing and quartering was reserved for crimes like treason or rebellion, as it was the authorities' way of sending a statement to all the other rebels in the country. The drawing part comes when you get tied to a wooden frame and dragged by a horse to the execution site. Your body would be injured when you get to the site, especially if the ride was too rough. Once at the execution site, you'll be forced to face the real horror. They'd hang you by the neck, but cut you down before you die because they just want you to suffer. From there, they would disembowel you, cutting your belly open to remove some of your guts and maybe even your heart. You'd likely die in that stage, but others are unlucky enough to stay alive for the final stage, which is the quartering. Here, your limbs would be tied to horses going in opposite directions as they will tear your body apart. Keel hauling. When you think of the pirates during the Middle Ages, it's hard not to think about them sailing the high seas, pillaging ships, and going from one port to another to drink until they drop. But even the pirates had their own way of dealing with criminals or mutineers. If you thought that being a pirate was all about adventures, just make sure that you don't piss the captain off or commit a major offense that's against the pirate code. That's because pirates won't leave you with a simple slap on the wrist. Instead, you're going to have to go through something called keel hauling. What happens here is that you'd be tied to a rope that runs underneath the ship from one side to the other. Pirates would then throw you overboard, allowing you to get dragged along the ship's underside. That's why it's called keel hauling, as you'll be hauled along the keel, the main structure at the bottom of the ship. As you're getting dragged onto the ship, that's when you'll realize that maybe the pirate's life isn't for you. The sharp barnacles along the ship's hull will slice through your skin and flesh as if you're submerged in a giant cheese grater. There's also a good chance that you're going to drown, especially if the captain wants to leave you there to die. The unlucky ones that survive usually have so many wounds and scratches on their body and faces, making them so ugly even their own mother wouldn't recognize them. Pressing. Let's say you committed a crime in medieval Europe and you were condemned to pressing. At first, the word pressing doesn't sound too bad, but you heard that in French it's called peine forte et dure, which translates to strong and harsh punishment. That's when you know you are in for the worst time of your life. Pressing often happens during a trial, especially when you are forced to plead guilty. If you don't want to admit guilt, that's when pressing happens, to compel you to tell everyone that you're guilty. In pressing, a wooden board is placed on top of you as you lay on the ground. Then heavy stones or weights are gradually added to the board until the weight becomes so unbearable that you're forced to plead guilty or die. The increasing pressure would slowly crush your chest, making it harder for you to breathe while you're in so much pain. Sometimes the victim could survive for days, especially if they have strong muscles and bones. However, the crushing weight would eventually be too much, as it could lead to internal injuries or suffocation. Essentially, the authorities are in a win-win situation here because they want to force you to admit your guilt or kill you. Either way, you die, because admitting your guilt would also condemn you to another execution method, the heretic's fork. The Spanish Inquisition likely had an entire room full of torture and execution devices meant for heretics and any person who defied the church. So if you offended the church with your not-so-Christian ideas, the Spanish Inquisition's going to have its way with you using a wide method of execution devices, including the heretic's fork. The heretic's fork looked like an accessory because it was meant to be worn around your neck, but the difference is that wearing it had deadly consequences. It had two sets of fork-like prongs. One was positioned under the chin, while the other pressed against the chest. Basically, when you were made to wear the heretic's fork, you'll be forced to keep your head up high. If you moved your head, or even did something as simple as speaking, the forks would dig through your neck and chest, causing immense pain before killing you. Even if you had all the discipline in the world to avoid moving your head, the heretic's fork made resting or sleeping impossible, because that would mean allowing the prongs to pierce through your skin and flesh. As such, those who were made to wear this device would either confess their crimes or succumb to their exhaustion before allowing the forks on their neck and chest to kill them, boiling alive. One day, you're chilling in prison after you were found guilty of a serious crime, such as treason or poisoning, but you suddenly see a few guys taking out a huge cauldron and boiling water over a huge fire. You suddenly think, maybe they're cooking my last meal, but it turns out that you're the one who will get cooked. It's as simple as it sounds. You will get immersed in a pot full of water and oil. At first, the liquid would be cold, or at the very least warm, but as the temperature increases, you're going to be in a lot of pain as your skin is slowly burned. Sometimes the condemned would be thrown into a pot with the liquid already boiling. The shock and pain were immediate, but it was as effective as slowly increasing the temperature. The point here is that you're going to get tortured as the organs inside of your body are slowly being cooked while you're conscious and screaming at the top of your lungs for mercy. Soon enough, you'll be ready to be served to dogs or lions as a meal. However, luckily you won't be alive for the second part since you die at some point while being cooked. Gibbeting. Suppose that you were a criminal in Europe during the 16th century. You just found out that you were condemned to death after committing a heinous crime, such as piracy. Of course, you'd think they'd use the tried and tested execution method of hanging you. Instead, you see the executioners dragging a large cage as you suddenly realize that you're about to face a fate worse than death. Gibbeting was unlike your usual execution method in that no one directly executes you. Instead, you'd simply be left hanging in an iron cage in a public place as if you're an oversized bird. At first, you'd think that this doesn't sound too bad, but then you realize that you'll be left there your entire life, without any food and water, all while people all over the town can see you in the sorriest state of your life. Once you're hoisted up in that cage, it's game over for you, because you'd be left to linger there until you die. You spent weeks exposed to the heat of the sun or the freezing temperatures of winter. As your body grows weaker, you'd be telling everyone passing by to put you out of your misery. Eventually, you'll die due to sheer exhaustion, hunger, and thirst. Gibbeting was one of the most popular execution methods throughout Europe during the medieval ages, and even until the earlier part of the modern period. It served as a way to both humiliate and execute murderers, and some of the worst criminals, and the prolonged nature of this execution is the reason why most criminals would rather have their heads chopped off instead. Buried alive. No, this isn't a 90s WWE match involving The Undertaker and Kane. Instead, it was an actual medieval execution method designed to be as grim as possible for those who deserve the worst type of death imaginable. So if you've been condemned to death for a major crime, such as when you were a nun who broke your vow, or if you were an adulterer, you're not going to get a quick beheading or hanging. Instead, the authorities are going to make you suffer. What happens is that you'll be placed in a tight coffin with just enough room to fit your body and a small pocket of air. From there, you'll be buried 6 feet under, or in an underground cavern with nothing but pitch black darkness. The goal here is to kill you slowly and terrifyingly, as there is nothing you can do but scream your lungs out, hoping that anyone will hear and rescue you. But that only speeds up your death, because screaming will only consume whatever oxygen is left inside the casket. Claustrophobia will also kick in to terrorize you mentally and emotionally. Meanwhile, the lack of air and the crushing weight of the earth above you will suffocate you slowly but surely, and you're only going to lose your mind to the horror of your impending death. The Colombian necktie. The Colombian necktie wasn't a medieval fashion statement or a trendy accessory. Instead, it was an unusually dark and savage execution method that was made famous in Colombia from the latter part of the medieval period until the modern era. Like most execution methods, this was a public affair where you'd be taken to a scaffold in front of everyone in town. From there, an executioner would use a sharp blade to skillfully slit your neck open from ear to ear, allowing blood to stain the stage or even splatter to the crowd in front. In most cases, the execution stops there, as the authorities would say, "Yep, that's more than enough to kill the guy." However, the Colombian necktie takes things to a gruesome level, with the executioner reaching into the wound to grasp your tongue. He then pulls it out through the slash in your throat and then allows it to hang around your neck, resembling a necktie. Now you know where the name comes from. As you can see, it's a throat slit that has a darker extra step meant to humiliate you and strike horror into the hearts of the crowd. Of course, the more sadistic townspeople would probably be cheering on, because we all know that some medieval folks weren't the most civilized people. The Tiber. It's the Middle Ages, and you're in Rome, but instead of enjoying the sights and sounds of this ancient city while basking in the scenery of the Tiber River, you're there to be executed in a manner exclusive to the Romans. The Tiber River used to be a stage for executions during the medieval era, and it was one of the most dramatic ways of killing a condemned criminal while making a statement to the people. In most cases, criminals and rebels deserving the harshest execution were made to face the Tiber. You'd be taken to the edge of the river, usually a bridge that spans the entire Tiber River. Locals and travelers alike would go there to witness justice served the Roman way, as you're paraded through the streets to humiliate you and warn other people never to do what you did when you got convicted of a crime. Once you reach the riverbank, you will face your final moments. The executioners would have a lot of different ways to end you. They could simply throw you off the bridge to let you drown in the waters of the river, but there was a more inhumane way of killing you. They could tie you to a stake and leave you near the riverbank during a low tide. From there, you'd be left to die as the river's currents rise, eventually drowning you slowly and steadily. So if you happen to be in Rome in today's era, you'd probably be thinking about how many people met their end by drowning in this now famous tourist site. Mazzatello. You may know Italy as the land where people get offended if you don't eat your pizza the right way or use heavy cream on your carbonara. But there was a darker period in this country's time when offending the law meant getting executed through a method called mazzatello. Don't mistake this for mozzarella's cousin, because mazzatello is entirely different. The name originates from the Italian word mazza, meaning mace. Now, you probably already know where this is going. If you were the condemned, you'd be taken to a scaffold, where a priest would offer last rites. But what seemed like a solemn affair immediately turns into a bloody event when the executioner arrives with a large mallet-like weapon. From there, the executioner would deliver a fatal blow to your head, crushing your skull. But if you have a particularly thick head that's capable of taking the initial mallet blow, you're not in the clear just yet. You'd probably even wish that you died right then and there, because the second stage is even worse. The executioner, instead of delivering a second mallet blow, would cut your throat, ensuring your death. In short, this was a two-step process that was so brutal that it wasn't the most precise way of killing people, because they couldn't find a better way to kill you instantly. Then again, the fact that it was barbaric and primitive was one of the reasons why it also served as a reminder to people never to break Italian law.